B.H. Fairchild's long, fugue-like poem, Beauty, is surely one of the best poems of the last 50 years. Weaving together memories of his childhood among the resilient residents of the Southern Plains, particularly a strange occurrence of exhibitionism in his father's machine shop, with a trip he took much later in life with his wife to Florence. Fairchild prompts us to ponder what we talk about when we talk about beauty. At the heart of the poem is the observation that beauty is often somehow embarrassing. He says, quote, "No male member of my family has ever used this word in my hearing or anyone else's except in reference perhaps to a new pickup or dead deer." Beauty is disconcerting for men. He says, men who knew the true meaning of labor and money and other hard, true things, and did not ever use the word beauty. Beauty makes strong men afraid. But what is it that is embarrassing about beauty? Why does it provoke in strong men the need to be stronger, the fear of weakness? It must be that beauty makes us somehow aware of our own limitation, of something small in us. In Rilke's great poem, Archaic Torso of Apollo, the reader is carried along on an encounter with beauty that ends with the sudden, famous insistence that, quote, "you must change your life." Nothing in the poem suggests that the change is what we would normally call a moral change. Rather, it seems to have something to do with recognizing the way real beauty inevitably casts judgment on our mundane indifference to it. Beauty calls our priorities into question. Beauty is disruptive. In this and other ways, it is like grace. Many modern patterns of thought conspire against beauty. The soft utilitarianism that saturates our society tells us that beauty is just a distraction from the really useful things. Given postmodernism's tendency to reduce all aspects of human life to the struggle for power, many people, especially, unfortunately, in college English departments, are apt to see any talk of beauty as merely a means of covering up some injustice. Influencing all these positions is the relativism that says all beauty is just in the mind or the eye of the beholder. Even the church often conspires against beauty, as certain forms of Protestantism treat beauty with the suspicion that it is simply a trapdoor into idolatry. We think we are somehow guarded against the idols in our heart by surrounding ourselves with as drab and dreary an environment as possible. Yet beauty deserves a place of honor in our discussions about God, a place that is indeed occupied until recently. Of course, most of us first encountered beauty's relationship to God not in an argument, but rather as an argument. Humanity's constant intuition about beauty has been that beauty points beyond itself to the divine. I was blessed in college with many long, late-night conversations in the dorms. Another right of youth I sometimes fear has been endangered by the proliferation of electronic distractions. See my colleague Alan Noble's book on that subject. Many of these conversations, naturally, were about God and how we can know God exists. On one night, I vividly remember a good friend, usually a far more pious and Orthodox Christian than I was at the time, was expressing a deep and anguished doubt about God's existence. Such resources of traditional apologetics as I had were completely inadequate for reassuring my friend, as he was not suffering from an intellectual misgiving, but rather from a lack of feeling God's presence. Finally, my feeble intellect exhausted, I took my friend by the arm and tugged him out into the hall and down the stairs into the parking lot, where a full moon glowed over the parked cars and the leafy tops of the surrounding trees. Look was the only argument I had. It was enough. My friend, in tears and in prayer, acknowledged anew the reality of God's nearness to us. Though the dramatic nature of the scene is due, no doubt, largely to youthful romanticism, the core of the experience has been repeated throughout human history. Beauty inevitably carries with it the sense that God is near. Many years after that night in the dorm, I went through my own period of doubt, often struggling with my faith on the long, solitary drive to work. Ultimately, I found my faith restored and renewed in drawing near to our Lord in prayer and in reading the scripture. But the way back to these good things seems to have been open to me as I sat in the office parking lot and gazed at a particular tree, reddened and luminous in its October glory. I have to pause and acknowledge my colleagues in the room that tree has now been cut down. I'm so sorry about that. I could think of scientific, materialist reasons for the tree to turn red. I cannot explain, however, how it should be that the beauty of the tree should so powerfully affect me, why it should call so to my soul. Why should it matter to me so much that the tree is red? What language is this that my soul instinctively knows? The mystery of beauty points us to the deeper mystery of being. Looking at that tree, I knew that beauty is the voice of God, and that the voice of God is the presence of God. Contrary to the modern tendency to be indifferent to beauty, Augustine struggled with guilt over his great susceptibility to it, recognizing how loving it more than God can lead us astray, even while God is himself ultimate beauty. My students often like to bring up when we're reading the Confessions that I just made them read the Aeneid, and that Augustine feels guilty about reading the Aeneid. And then I tell them, okay, if it gets to the point that you feel like you love the Aeneid so much that it's replacing God in your life, then we'll talk. Augustine was, of course, right to be wary of falling into idolatry. Yet in some sense, in the young Augustine's powerful attraction to poetry, theater, and female charm, we can see dim hints of the desire that will draw him to God, who is the ultimate beauty, and thus the source of all that we call beautiful. Looking back on his life, Augustine says to God, quote, "Late have I loved you, beauty so old and so new. Late have I loved you. And see, you were within me, and I was in the external world and sought you there. And in my unlovely state, I plunged into those lovely created things which you made. You were with me, and I was not with you. The lovely things kept me far from you, though if they did not have their existence in you, they had no existence at all. You called and cried out loud and shattered my deafness. You were radiant and resplendent. You put to flight my blindness. You were fragrant, and I drew in my breath, and now pant after you. I tasted you, and I feel but hunger and thirst for you. You touched me, and I am set on fire to attain the peace which is yours." The young Augustine was no more wrong to seek beauty than he was to seek truth and goodness. But like many of us, he failed for far too long to look through beauty to the ultimate beauty of God. He failed for much too long to see beauty as a language that speaks of something beyond itself. Yet, one can imagine how much worse off he would have been had he instead been utterly insensitive to all beauty. He might have avoided false gods at the price of having missed the one true God. If God was calling out to him through the beauty of creation, then Augustine's perception of beauty was a blessing, a path home provided by God himself. I sometimes think that atheism, rather than an intellectual block, is a form of tone deafness. We can fail to hear the voice that is beauty, thinking like the young Augustine before his conversion, that beautiful things speak only for and of themselves. When we do so, we fail to ask the important question: what does beauty say to us about the nature of reality, about the truth beneath the surface of appearances? We can look at the full moon and see only a chunk of rock in orbit, never asking ourselves why we are compelled to keep looking. In the Christian tradition, the understanding of the beautiful God who says, I am, is augmented by the Greek exploration of being, or ouzra, primarily through a Platonic tradition. There certainly is no one Christian understanding of beauty, but it is safe to say that in general, Christian thought associates beauty with God's ultimate being. James Matthew Wilson sums up this tradition as it is manifested in the work of Jacques Maritain, saying, quote, if form is the principle of being and of any and everything, and if it is form that constitutes beauty, then beauty must be convertible or equal with, exchangeable with being. Everything, insofar as it has being, must have to that extent beauty. Along with unity, goodness, and truth, beauty must be one of the transcendental properties of being. And as God is being itself, so these properties must name God. So what Wilson tells us then is that for the Christian, beauty is a way in which the infinite God makes himself known to us. Beauty is a picture of grace, grace's very mirror. It comes unasked for and undeserved to lift us out of ourselves and above our petty concerns. It is, however, also like grace in that perhaps it can be resisted. We can harden our hearts to it. One thing good poetry, stories, and art of all kinds can do is teach us to respond again to beauty. Our response to beauty often seems to take the form of longing. This is why beauty is often expressed as a kind of pain. An encounter with beauty stirs in us the knowledge of something beyond or behind material reality, but not wholly antagonistic to that reality. A true encounter with beauty is an experience of delectable longing, of precious pain. We can call it a form of eros. Learning what to love, the acquisition of taste, has historically and until very recently been at the heart of everything called education in the Western world. And thanks to many people attending this conference, it's at the heart of education again. It was assumed that the job of the teacher is to instruct the pupil in love for the things worthy of love, to shape the desire of the young for the pursuit of the true, the good, and the beautiful. This process takes time, which is why it is tragic to see education from preschool through college, abandoning beauty to focus on more practical subjects. Cultivating our sensitivity to beauty, a cultivation of proper desire, is why we read beyond the simple utilitarian motive of acquiring information. Drawing on Augustine, James K.A. Smith has consistently argued that we are what we love. He means that we are shaped by the things toward which we orient our desire, which is why we should be careful to aim ourselves at God. Beauty teaches us to love what is lovable, and through that, to love God. Our culture, as Wilson says, quote, lies to itself in denying the reality of beauty. and barbarizes and narrows its intellect in treating aesthetic education as unimportant to the formation of a complex human being. When we let the aesthetic sense die in us, when we lose the longing, we fail to live up to the charge given to us in Philippians 4:8. I always like to tell my students there's a big difference between whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are excellent, whatsoever things are commendable, and our great big cultural just whatever. Moreover, we miss the life abundant that Jesus offers to us through himself. One of the most powerful expressions of the longing evoked by beauty I know of is W.B. Yeats' The Song of Wandering Aengus. Although Yeats apparently wrote the poem out of a frustrated, unrequited love for the Irish beauty and revolutionary Maud Gonne, it speaks far more universally of the way beauty tugs us toward a deeper world and our ultimate home. He begins with, "I went out to the hazelwood because a fire was in my head." A succinct and exquisite expression of innate human restlessness. One thinks of Augustine's famous opening line in his confession to God, "Our heart is restless until it rests in you." Having done what men throughout time have done when at a loss for any other meaningful action, gone fishing, the narrator of the poem returns to his cabin with his catch. Soon, however, he discovers that the little silver trout he caught has been transformed into what he calls a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair. When Yeats created this image, he was thinking of the first time he saw Maud Gonne, framed by the window behind her, through which he could see apple blossoms. But the image suggests more generally a beauty suspended between heaven and earth. The moment is fleeting, however, as the fairy girl calls his name just before she, quote, ran and faded through the brightening air. In allegorical form, this is a moment anyone who has ever had his or her name called by beauty will recognize. The soul is called by beauty even as it somehow remains out of reach. Beauty always calls our name and runs. This is the experience outlined by Plato, by Plato's Socrates in the Symposium, an early recognition of beauty's deeper form of eros. Having given a succinct picture of the sort of encounter with beauty that demands one change one's life, Yeats's poem culminates in a passionate declaration of longing and dedication. I'm going to read the last stanza of the poem to you, in part to make the rhetorical point, and in part because I read it out loud every chance I get. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hands and walk among long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. Those who pursue beauty resign themselves to the perpetual nature of that pursuit, confident in its attainment only in the beyond, represented in Yeats' poem by the ethereal images of the golden apples and the silver apples of the heavenly bodies. One contemplates this poem, though, not with a sense of frustration at unrequited love, but rather with the impression that the endless pursuit of beauty is the most noble mode of human life. I state that all I'm trying to do as an educator is help people become the sorts who will spend the rest of their life wandering the hills looking for the golden apples of the sun. Because beauty is a necessary disruption. That we perpetually seek beauty does not mean we should ever fear exhausting it. Because it has its source in the infinite God, beauty is inexhaustible. This insight should relieve the contemporary artist of the heavy burden that is our sense of belatedness. Beauty has not been exhausted. It was not finished off by the Romantic poets or finally consumed by Rossetti or Tennyson. Beauty has a place in the modern world because the source of all beauty is the limitless, infinite God. Beauty is still and always possible. We needn't settle for kitsch or sentimentality or pure irony or unadulterated rage. We don't need to settle for the merely clever or the snarky. We don't need to settle for the simply pleasant or smugly confirming. Beauty is still possible. It can still inspire and trouble us. One might object, of course, that beauty is in the eye of the beholder anyway. This point is inevitably made whenever one attempts to discuss beauty. And the person who makes it usually seems to think that he is being very modern and intellectual. No sentiment, however, could be more dull and conventional than the idea that beauty is merely subjective. Though I can't tell you how often a day I am corrected online about this point. Haven't I heard? Beauty is subjective. Both C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man and Dietrich von Hildebrand in his Aesthetics have shown the weakness of this view of beauty. And I'll refer you to them. They can do a better job than I can of refuting the idea that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Hildebrand grounds his view of beauty's objectivity in the very way we use the word beautiful. Listen to what he says. The preposition for, as linked organically to something that is merely pleasant, would have a wholly different meaning if we were to attach the predicate beautiful. Normally we say, this color is beautiful, this melody is beautiful, not beautiful for me. In the exceptional case where we do say this word for, where we do say this, the word for does not mean that the importance of the color or the melody has its origin in the pleasant effect it has on me. Rather, we mean, in my opinion, they are beautiful. In this case, the preposition expresses a relationship to my judgment, which discerns beauty. Others may not find them beautiful, but I do. The importance that is expressed in the term beauty is not in any way expressed by the phrase for me, as it is when I say that something is gratifying for me. There can be no doubt about it that when we see a landscape and exclaim how beautiful it is, we are referring primarily to a quality of the landscape, not to an effect it has on us. That passage from Hildebrand might make you think of Lewis's Abolition of Man as well when he takes up the same point. Hildebrand blames David Hume for modern misperceptions about the nature of beauty, which is fine. I'm all for blaming Hume for things. But regardless of who is to blame for the confusion, it's not hard to see Hildebrand's larger point. For instance, I might believe I see a sparrow sitting on a fence post about 200 yards away, down by the barn. You may say, no, that is not a sparrow. Our dispute would be about the accuracy of my perception, not about the general existence of sparrows. In fact, our disagreement presupposes the existence of sparrows as an objective phenomenon. Similarly, you and I may disagree about what beauty refers to. I may find Bach's Brandenburg Concertos beautiful, while you find beauty in Nine Inch Nails. But in the very act of disagreeing over where beauty is found, we have agreed that the word beauty indeed refers to something. What happens to us encountering beauty is a response to something present, really present, in the object we consider beautiful. B.H. Fairchild's beauty ends with an image of this given nature of the beautiful. Having turned after a long while from Donatello's statue of David, the poet and his wife walk to a window through which they see the Florence cityscape. Blazing, they say, blazing like miles of uncut wheat, the farthest buildings taken in their turn, and the great dome, the way the metal roof of the machine shop, I tell her, would break into flame late on an autumn day with such beauty. Fairchild connects the plains of his youth with the historic city he is visiting, and he sees in both places beauty's power to interrupt, to break into the ordinary, and remind us that existence itself is miraculous, and that all being points us toward God. Fairchild's metal roof reminds us of how Hopkins, in God's grandeur, describes the way the glory of God as seen in creation will flame out like shining from shook foil. In the sudden gift of the light over Florence, we are reminded of beauty's resemblance to grace, our unearned and unexpected return into God's presence. Thank you. I know we're up against lunch, which is an introduce. Not a, I don't want to cut it too long. If you have any questions, 2 questions. Got a couple of minutes. Yes.
I thought it was funny the moment you were sort of talking about with your students and sort of reading Augustine and reflecting on the reading of D&D. I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for ways that we can help students maybe unlock and see the beauty in these more in these texts that perhaps are more difficult for them to innately attach to the beauty within them, like D&D or medieval texts or something like that.
Yeah, that's such a great question. Probably I'm not going to say anything you haven't heard before, but I would start with going slowly, right? When we just shove mass amounts of text at students and say, enjoy this by 8 o'clock on Tuesday, right? Then we're kind of setting ourselves up for failure there, right? When I think back on some of the best learning experiences I had as a student, both the primary and secondary level and in college, I often think about some of my favorite teachers reading to me, right? Just reading aloud. I had a professor in college who somehow managed to teach me astounding things about Renaissance literature, primarily just by letting Renaissance literature speak for itself. And so, I think reading the text, reading the book aloud in class is so valuable for that. And just letting yourself savor it, which for them, at first is going to be a little awkward. Like, why does my professor keep reading that same line over and over again? And when is he going to stop? Right? But eventually, I think you break through that awkwardness. Because in some ways that awkwardness is the right response to have. Right? They should be disturbed by the beauty. So I would say definitely going slow, savoring it. I'm just more and more convinced that in almost any classroom context, appreciation is 5 times more important than analysis.